The air buzzed with excitement. It was the biggest day in many of these students' lives. High school graduation. Families filled every row of the large auditorium. Balloons bounced. Phones were raised to record every moment, and the school band played in the background. The stage was decorated in the school's colors, and the principal stood at the podium, ready to begin calling names. Among the crowd, just near the back doors of the hall, stood a tall man in uniform. His chest was covered in medals. His posture was straight, unshakable. His presence demanded respect, even if no one seemed to notice him at first. He wasn't here to draw attention. He was here for one reason, to see his son graduate. That man was Master Sergeant Darrell James, a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and the father of Malcolm James, a graduating senior. Darrell had just flown in, literally just hours ago. After serving a long and grueling deployment overseas, he had been granted emergency leave. The timing was tight. He hadn't even had a chance to change clothes or shave the dust of travel off his face. Still in his dress blues, he went straight from the airport to the school, hoping to slip in unnoticed. But in a world where things don't always go as planned, the unexpected happened. As Darrell quietly found a spot to stand at the back, two school security guards spotted him. They exchanged glances and immediately walked over. One of them, a tall man with sunglasses still on his head indoors, stepped forward. "Sir," he said firmly, "this section is restricted. We're at full capacity. You need to leave." Darrell was stunned for a moment. He looked around, unsure if the guard was serious. "I'm not trying to cause a problem," he said respectfully. "I just got in. My son is graduating today, Malcolm James. I flew across the world to be here. I'll stand. I just want to watch." But the second guard was already shaking his head. "We have rules," he said. "If you're not on the guest list, you're not allowed inside." Darrell pulled out his military ID and explained the situation again. How he'd spoken to the school weeks ago from his base overseas, how arrangements had been made to let him attend without a formal ticket. But there were no records in the guard system. No ticket, no name on the printed list. And so, as far as they were concerned, he was just an unregistered guest in a packed venue. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now." This time, one of them put a hand lightly on his arm. Not aggressively, but enough to say, "You're not welcome here." The crowd near the front didn't seem to notice. They were focused on the ceremony, on their children. But a few heads turned. Someone in the back row whispered, "Wait, isn't he military?" Darrell felt something he hadn't felt in years: humiliation. He wasn't angry. He was hurt. He had survived war zones, led men into battle, and endured things most people couldn't imagine. But here he was, back home on American soil, being treated like a trespasser at his own son's graduation. He looked toward the stage, straining to see if Malcolm had spotted him. He hadn't. Not yet. Darrell took a breath. He thought about arguing. He thought about walking out quietly. But just then, before he could make a decision, someone else stood up. From the middle of the crowd, a voice called out with calm authority, "Excuse me, that man's not going anywhere." And just like that, the mood in the room shifted. The quiet dismissal of a Marine was about to turn into something no one in that room would ever forget. Master Sergeant Darrell James wasn't just any man in uniform. If those guards had known even a fraction of his story, they would have stood at attention, not tried to escort him out. Darrell had served in the United States Marine Corps for 22 years. He'd been deployed to some of the most dangerous regions on the planet: Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia, leading missions that didn't make headlines but saved countless lives. He had lost friends, brothers in arms, and parts of himself during those years. And despite it all, he had kept going, for duty, for honor, and most importantly, for his family. But today wasn't about war. It was about peace. It was about his son, Malcolm. Darrell had promised Malcolm that he would be there for his graduation, no matter what. And that promise hadn't been easy to keep. His unit had been called into an emergency deployment just weeks before the big day. He knew he'd miss it, and that broke him more than any battlefield ever could. But then a rare moment of mercy from command changed everything. Due to exceptional service and the personal significance of the event, Darrell had been granted emergency family leave, a near miracle during an overseas operation. He booked the first flight home, connecting through 3 countries, barely sleeping, and carrying only one small bag. Still in his dress blues, he didn't even stop to rest. He hadn't seen Malcolm in over a year, and if he moved fast enough, he could make it, just in time to watch his son cross the stage. He didn't care about sitting. He didn't need attention. He didn't even need a photo. He just wanted to stand quietly in the back, to see the pride on his son's face and know that, even after everything, he hadn't broken his promise. But the system didn't recognize devotion or sacrifice. All it saw was a man not on the list. The security guards didn't know that Daryl had once saved an entire platoon when their convoy was ambushed. They didn't know about the 3 Purple Hearts or the Bronze Star on his chest. They didn't know that this wasn't just a man in a uniform. It was a living piece of American history standing humbly at the back of a high school gym. And so, they moved to remove him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the auditorium, seated discreetly among the families, were 6 men, dressed in suits, with clean-shaven faces and alert eyes. They watched everything. These weren't parents, teachers, or guests. They were Navy SEALs, some retired, others still in reserve duty. But above all, they were Daryl's brothers. Each of them owed their lives to the man being escorted out of the room. Years earlier, during a covert joint operation gone wrong, Daryl had made a decision that no commander is ever prepared for. He risked his life, against orders, to retrieve a wounded SEAL team from behind enemy lines. That team included the 6 men now sitting quietly, watching the man who saved them being treated like a trespasser. They had kept in touch with Daryl ever since. When they learned he was trying to make it to his son's graduation, they flew in without hesitation. They had no plan to make a scene. They were just there to support their old commander in silence. But now, silence wasn't an option. One of the SEALs leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "That's Daryl," he whispered. "They're trying to throw him out?" Another muttered, "No way." The room didn't know it yet, but the moment had changed. The next few minutes would turn a routine school ceremony into a moment of national pride, and no one saw it coming. Because when a Marine is in trouble, especially one like Daryl, brothers answer the call. And 6 SEALs were about to remind the room, and the world, exactly what that looks like. The auditorium was still alive with excitement. The band had just finished a short interlude, and the principal was preparing to resume the reading of names. Most people were chatting quietly, unaware that something unusual was unfolding at the back of the room. But in one row near the middle, 6 men sat unervingly still, watching, listening. They weren't just guests. They weren't teachers. They weren't part of the faculty. These were 6 elite Navy SEALs, quiet professionals, trained for missions that most people will never even hear about. Each of them had served in the harshest corners of the world. Each of them had walked through fire. And all of them had one thing in common. They owed their lives to Master Sergeant Daryl James. As the 2 guards began to pressure Daryl toward the exit, the SEALs began exchanging glances, subtle, sharp, meaningful. No words were needed at first. Their body language said it all. They had come in peace, dressed in suits, trying to stay in the background. They had no interest in making this day about themselves. It was Malcolm's moment. It was Daryl's promise fulfilled. But watching Daryl, the man who had once carried a wounded teammate for 3 miles under enemy fire, being treated like an unwanted intruder, something inside them snapped. To the guards, he was just another problem to solve. But to these 6 warriors, he was family. The tallest among them, Lieutenant Cole Ramirez, leaned forward slightly. A former sniper and team leader, Cole had never been one to raise his voice. But now his jaw clenched tight. "That's enough," he muttered under his breath. Beside him, Marcus Bell, a communications officer who had nearly lost a leg on their last mission with Daryl, gave a slow nod. "They don't know who they're talking to," Marcus whispered. "They don't have to," said another. "But they're about to learn what respect looks like." One of them quickly pulled out a phone and began calling the school's main office. He knew that if anyone in administration remembered the conversation about Daryl's emergency return, they could confirm the story and stop this nonsense before it escalated. But the others were already rising to their feet. As the guards lightly touched Daryl's elbow again, clearly preparing to escort him outside, 4 SEALs stood up, slowly and silently. They weren't trying to intimidate. They weren't causing a scene. They were simply sending a message. You are not alone. The fifth and sixth followed a few steps behind, walking with purpose. The crowd didn't quite understand what was happening yet. A few heads turned. A whisper rippled through the auditorium. Who are those men? Something's going on in the back. And then, the moment when the tension snapped like a guitar string. One SEAL calmly stepped forward, placing himself between the guards and Daryl. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't wave his hands. He simply said, in a clear and even tone, "Excuse me, sir. That man is a hero. He's not going anywhere." The guards froze. Their training hadn't prepared them for this. For 6 highly disciplined men moving like a unit, calmly but firmly taking a stand. Another SEAL looked toward the front of the auditorium and saw the microphone still live at the podium. "Tom, tell them who's in this room," he said, and walked down the aisle. The moment the microphone reached his hand, the crowd went silent. No one expected what came next, because they weren't just about to hear a story. They were about to witness a lesson in honor that would echo far beyond a single graduation ceremony. A low hum ran through the auditorium, not from the speakers, but from the audience itself. Something was happening. The graduation ceremony had paused for a moment as faculty adjusted the microphone at the podium. The names were supposed to continue, but instead, all eyes turned toward the aisle, where a man in a suit calmly walked toward the front. He didn't look like school staff. He didn't look like someone about to give a speech. He looked like someone with a purpose. He reached the podium, leaned toward the mic, and said clearly, "Before we continue, I need to say something." The room hushed. The principal, surprised and slightly panicked, began to move toward the stage, but then paused as another man stood from the audience and gave him a quick, subtle nod. The principal recognized him, a high-ranking military liaison for the district. He, too, had realized what was happening. He gave the signal to let it play out. The man at the mic continued. "That man being escorted out is not just someone's father. He's not just a guest. He's a United States Marine. And not just any Marine. He's Master Sergeant Daryl James." Murmurs moved through the crowd. "He's the reason some of us are even standing here today. Years ago, in a mission I can't fully speak about, he pulled 6 of us out of an ambush in the dead of night, under gunfire, when he had no obligation to do so. He carried wounded men, patched bleeding ones, and risked his own life to save ours. That man," he said, pointing to the back, "is a hero." Now the auditorium was dead silent. Some parents looked at each other, whispering. A few students stood up slightly in their chairs to get a glimpse of the Marine in question. The speaker took a breath. And today, all he wanted to do was watch his son graduate. No seat, no special recognition, just to see him walk the stage. And he nearly got thrown out, not because of bad behavior, not because of danger, but because someone didn't know who he was. And I get it. Not everyone knows every name. But it's not about fame. It's about respect. The crowd slowly started to clap, scattered at first, hesitant. But then it grew. 1 row, then 2. Then all at once, the entire auditorium stood up in applause. People turned to look at Daryl, who now stood frozen near the back wall. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to do. He was used to discipline, silence, duty. He was not used to being the center of a standing ovation. One of the guards stepped back, looking stunned. The other whispered, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Daryl looked at them, and with grace in his voice, replied, "It's okay. Now you do." At that moment, something even more powerful happened. The principal stepped up to the mic and said, "Master Sergeant James, please, we have a seat for you in the front row." The crowd parted like the sea. Daryl began walking down the aisle, flanked on either side by the 6 SEALs, now standing proudly. As he took his seat near the stage, the announcer cleared his throat and continued. "Malcolm James." From behind the curtain, Malcolm stepped out. He was halfway across the stage when he saw who was sitting front row, eyes wide, heart racing. "Dad," he mouthed. Tears welled up instantly. He hadn't known if his father would make it. He hadn't dared to believe. Daryl stood, gave a proud salute, and the crowd roared again. The moment Malcolm saw his father in the front row, still in his crisp, decorated Marine Corps dress blues, something shifted inside him. His walk slowed. His posture straightened. The diploma in his hand suddenly felt heavier, more meaningful. He hadn't seen his father in over a year. Deployment had taken Master Sergeant Darrell James halfway around the world, to places Malcolm didn't even know how to pronounce. They spoke when they could, through scratchy satellite calls and delayed messages. And while Malcolm tried to stay strong, every day without his father felt like a piece of his foundation was missing. They had made a promise that somehow, some way, Darrell would be there for his graduation. But when the days counted down and there was no confirmation, Malcolm began to accept what he already feared. Duty might keep his father away. Again. So when he stepped onto the stage and looked into the crowd, when his eyes locked onto that familiar uniform, that unmistakable figure, standing tall with a hand over his heart, Malcolm didn't just smile. He froze. His knees buckled slightly. His breath caught in his chest. And then, in front of hundreds of classmates, families, and strangers, he broke down in tears. The principal gave him a moment. No one rushed him. Darrell gave his son a proud nod. Just one, but it said everything. I'm here. I kept my word. You did it, son. Malcolm walked the rest of the stage with tears still on his cheeks, but now his steps were strong. Applause erupted again, not just for the diploma, but for the reunion, the moment of raw emotion, the kind of thing no script or speech could ever replicate. As Malcolm stepped off the stage, he didn't return to his seat. He went straight to his father, wrapping him in a hug that drew even more tears from the crowd. People stood again. Phones rose to capture the moment. No one cared about formalities anymore. Everyone knew they were witnessing something special. But the story didn't end there. A community transformed. After the ceremony, people approached Darrell with outstretched hands and open hearts. Teachers, veterans in the crowd, fellow parents, and even students shook his hand, hugged him, and said what the guards hadn't. Thank you. The two security guards, clearly humbled, also came over. Sir, we're deeply sorry, one of them said quietly. We didn't mean any disrespect. We were just doing our job. Darrell looked at them, not with anger, but with grace. I understand, he said. But remember, sometimes your job is more than rules. It's about people. The principal later called Darrell to the stage once again. This time, it was to formally honor him with a special recognition plaque from the school board for his service and sacrifice, not just to the country, but to the community. The 6 SEALs stood silently nearby, watching with pride. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. They had come to support a brother. That's all that mattered. A father, a promise, a legacy. The day could have been just another school event, another graduation speech, another shuffle of names and diplomas. Instead, it became a lesson for everyone present. People walked away that day remembering more than Malcolm's name. They remembered what it means to serve, what it means to stand up for someone, and what it means to keep a promise, even when the world makes it almost impossible. For Malcolm, his diploma now meant something far deeper. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of perseverance, love, and the kind of fatherhood that crosses oceans, deserts, and red tape to show up when it matters most. He would go on to tell that story countless times, in job interviews, in college essays, to his own kids someday. And every time, he would say the same thing. My father didn't just fight in wars. He fought to be there for me. Conclusion. A salute that echoed beyond the room. In a world where stories often focus on division, this one reminded people of something we all need to hear. That honor still matters. That showing up counts, even when it's hard. And that when one person is disrespected, it's okay. No, it's necessary for others to stand up and say, not today. Because what those 6 Navy SEALs did wasn't about medals or revenge. It was about respect. It was about reminding people that some heroes walk quietly among us, not asking for praise, just a chance to see their kid graduate. And when that chance is nearly taken away, good men and good brothers make sure the world stops and listens. So the next time someone says, he's just one man, remember this story. One man showed up. 6 men stood with him. And together, they changed a room and a young man's life forever.